everyone I know was changing jobs or stepping off the career ladder.
3.6 million Americans quit their
It's all
jobs.
because of the so-called Great Resignation.
Great Resignation.
I know what I want out of my career. Might as well just make the move.
41% of the world's working population is planning to switch this
1
year.
in 3 employees are considering leaving their
More
job.
than 4 million workers quit their jobs.
Should you consider quitting too?
Welcome to your favorite show, Nope, I'm Out, where we encourage you to throw in the towel, we inspire you to give up, and hopefully you'll be able to say, nope, I'm out to that situation, experience, or job that's no longer serving you. I have with me here the amazing, multidisciplinary creative, Natalie. How are you?
I am good, and how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. It's very early right now. I'm screaming. But I'm actually very, very
But we're here.
good. We're here. You know what I mean? We made it a bit, off time, but we made it, you know what I mean? Do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm obviously Natalie Narh. Like you said, I think I'm a multidisciplinary person, creative, but I think I'm only that kind of person because I like to explore. And in terms of now, I'm working as a creative at Bill & Dollar Boy, which is a social influencer agency, whatever that means. And then I'm also the co-founder of Newcomer, which is a social media platform for African creatives to connect, create, learn, and earn.
So there's a lot there. There is a lot there. And before we dive into it, we're actually going to play a game. Actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are. You know what's so funny? I was actually going to talk about Santi's album because I know we both listened to it. So that's actually what I was going to talk about. But we're going to play a very, very quick game.
Cool.
Because I know we both listen to a certain genre of music.
Yeah.
I will make it artists.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick a random letter.
Okay.
In fact, pick a letter.
S.
Okay. Oh, interesting. So we're going to have to name artists beginning with S.
Okay.
And I'm going to time you, and I'm slightly giving you an opportunity here to think about some of these things. And we will see.
How much time have I got?
Oh, well, we'll just see how long you last.
Oh, okay.
Basically.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Santi, Santha.
Oh, wait. Oh, wait. That's so interesting that you did it that way. It was meant to be you, then me, then me, then you.
She didn't say that.
Yeah, sorry. But I'll let you have those ones. Okay. Let's go again. Wait, hold on.
So wait, does that mean the first 2 are cancelled?
No, you can use those.
Okay.
You can use those. It's fine.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so Santi,
Solange.
Cisco.
Oh my god. S Club 7.
Oh man, that's a good one. Oh wow. So wow. I'm out. I'm done.
Okay. I was gonna say SWV. Next. That was actually.
That wasn't good.
That was pretty good.
That was 2.
That was pretty good. To be fair, but I think if I didn't stop you in the beginning, I think you would have gone on.
I might
you know
have.
what I mean?
Might
So
have.
I interrupted you. But I'm actually proper excited to have this conversation because you, as you say, are very multidisciplinary. And I love speaking to people who see themselves in many different things.
Okay,
But the first thing I'm gonna ask is, when was the last time you said, nope, I'm out?
I would say mid last year. That's when I switched agencies. I've never really been in the position where I've had to actively remove myself from an organization. But that's more or less what happened. And I think I'm in a space where I don't regret it, but it was still a space where I was like, oh, this is something I've not particularly done before. So I'd say mid last year.
So you were at an agency and now you're no longer at agency.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what you were doing at that agency to begin with. Perhaps why you even went there, and then maybe we can talk later about, what actually changed for you to kind of make that decision.
Yeah. So actually, context, I was working at Ogilvy, and the reason why I even ended up at Ogilvy in the first place, I think maybe
Just for the viewers at home, what is Ogilvy?
Ogilvy is, the simplest way to describe Ogilvy is an everything agency. They do advertising, marketing, PR, consulting, production, all of the above, all under one agency. And that's the easiest way to describe them. They're this creative powerhouse of some sort. Not of some sort, that's what they are.
Yeah. Okay. So that's where you were, basically.
Yeah, that's where I was. And I ended up there because when I was, say, maybe 12, 13, yeah, around there, like my dad and I were just talking about what I wanted to do and stuff. And I was like, oh, I really like advertising. Like, I know I want to do something within that field because it felt like the most secure form of being creative to me at the time. And then he was like, okay, if this is what you want to do, go and read up on David Ogilvy. And he asked me to do that because David Ogilvy started a bit later on in his life as a copywriter, I think in his 30s, I believe. So the point of that was for two things. One, to obviously find out about advertising, but also to understand the fact that I'm 12. I don't need to know what I want to do, but he just kind of wanted to have a feel of that. So because I did that, naturally, David Ogilvy became like my pillar for like understanding the context of advertising.
That's amazing. So I just need to add, sorry, I have to stop you here.
Yeah.
So you're 12 and you kind of pick advertising as this, albeit like secure form of like what you want to do. And the person you are introduced to or introduces you to the field is the founder of the company that you eventually end up working at.
Yeah.
Do you not find that strange at all?
No, because like it was just my dad saying, gotta read up on this guy. And like I did, and it made sense in the moment. And I think one thing I'm really thankful for as well is like growing up, my sister and I, my parents always gave us the freedom to be creative, so much to the extent where we're doing music lessons, art lessons, like pottery, like random shit like that. And I think it gave my sister and I the confidence to know that if we did want to go down that path, which we both ended up doing, we knew that at least for one thing, our parents weren't going to be a barrier.
Yeah.
And I'm always so grateful for that because that's a very common barrier for creatives to have. Like parents not giving you the space to like try or explore or do whatever you want. I think my sister might actually be a better person for this because she's also been in a space where she's quit a lot of things in a creative context. But yeah, that's more or less how it started. I even did like a little section on Ogilvy for my extended essay. I did IB. Wow. So for my extended essay, it was also based on advertising at Ogilvy. So he's always been on my mind in terms of that. And then for uni, right after I finished with that, I was looking for jobs and stuff. And actually, Natalie, I'm gonna backtrack. So I was gonna pause you anyway, and I was gonna take it back anyway because there's a lot. You know what? Let's do that right now.
Yeah. So first of all, there's just a lot to even just unpack in what you're talking about. First of all, you had parents that not only it's one thing to stand back and let your children do what they want to do. Yeah. It's another thing to actively encourage what they're saying they want to do at 12.
Yeah.
Because I think like I guess like one of the things that happens a lot like with parents and children and that kind of relationship is they kind of think they might grow out of this. Do you know what I mean? So they might not encourage you. They might just let you do what you're doing. And then you get to a certain age and they're like, actually,
you have to think of life.
Let's actually, stop the games. Yeah. And then like pick something else. But in your case, you have your dad who's actually telling you like, oh, actually, go and look at so-and-so, which in and of itself is like not necessarily a common thing. Yeah. Because who knows who David Ogilvy is his name. Who knows who that is? No, as in like not many, I don't think, so for context, where are you from? Like, yes.
So I'm from Ghana. Yes. So grew up in Ghana as well. So I was there up until uni, but then for the context on top of that as well, my parents were here as well before they moved back.
Okay.
So their whole idea was we kind of want you guys be my sister and I, to understand what's like living in London and what's like living like back home in Ghana. So we're always like coming here as well. And I think that really helped with our like cultural exposure to understanding what things like music, film and whatever look like outside of Ghana, but then also understanding what Ghanaian media also looked like. So because we're doing that bouncing, I was able to see some of the gaps that were here in the UK and some of the gaps that were like in Ghana even before like I moved here. So that was also another important part of things. And then what was your actual question? I forget.
I think that's super important though, because I think what I was getting at was that the fact that I was surprised that your dad knew who Ogilvy was.
Yeah.
And I think because I assumed that a lot of people who are born and bred here but their parents are born in perhaps like, you know, another country, their parents have to take some time out to even kind of understand the lay of the land and everything like that. And like knowing who famous advertisers are probably isn't on the top of the list of the things that they kind of have to tick off. And so that's why I was like, how did he even know, you know, who this person is?
I'm with you now. So he's kind of in my field, but not quite. He works in consulting. So he's also all about like businesses and people like doing what they want to do and stuff. So I think he's like the kind of person where as soon as he realizes that one of his kids is interested in something, he always finds something in relation to that. Maybe send us a Flipboard link. I don't know who uses Flipboard, but he does. But he would send us like links that are more or less curated to our interests. So even like back then, it was one of the things that he used to do, because then as well, he was teaching himself photography. So when he started like exploring that, I was more or less his like little minion doing that as well. He got bored after like 2 months, but that's something that obviously stayed with me. So it was through like exploring that with him that these kind of conversations ended up popping up like that early in my life as well. So,
that's just amazing, because I think I'm glad that this is the story. Because this is a very, very unique story. This is not many people who have, again, like parents who perhaps are not from here can kind of speak to, you know, their parents, even knowing what it is that they're interested in. I can imagine, you know, for many people, it's like you say you're interested in advertising. It's like,
what's that?
What is that?
My
like,
grandpa said it's useless, so I guess.
Okay, fair enough.
So that's like
some normalcy here. Okay, so that definitely kind of contributed to like, you know, the path that you're on, basically.
100%,
And so you kind of already researching this guy, as you said, like you're writing about this person, and then you end up at this agency. And is that the agency that you were talking about that you ended up quitting? Okay, so what did you do whilst you were actually there?
So I got in there through this internship called The Pipe, and it was for 9 months. And the beauty of that was we could explore different parts of the business. And I think for the first half of it, I was doing like mostly the ideation part of advertising, and I enjoyed that. But because all I was doing in uni was like production, like photography, videography, graphic design, etc., I felt I was missing that part of things. So I started looking in different parts of the business, like where can I find this? And then I found the social and content team. And I worked on a couple of briefs, and I just started sitting in that department every day and making myself furniture. And by the end of the internship, when they were looking for like who would stay on and like obviously who would just like have the internship, because I had made myself so permanent in that space, it was easier for me to get a full-time role there. So for a couple of years, I was there doing more or less like all the other things in production I like the design, videography, photography, etc. But then I started missing the ideation thing. So I realized that it's not that I like one or the other. I want to do both. But, because I felt like, you know, when you enter somewhere as an intern, no matter what you do in that business, because people know how you came into that business, that's kind of all they see you as sometimes. And I was also heading up this network called Ogilvy Roots, which is a network dedicated to championing greater ethnic and cultural diversity within, I guess, the agency itself, like the people culture, the work that we created, and the wider creative industry. And the interesting thing about that was, as much as like that's what I feel the context of my purpose within the creative industry is, it was almost overshadowing, not almost, it was overshadowing my actual job as a creative there. So people were thinking of Natalie as the D&I woman before Natalie the creative. And it wasn't allowing me to progress in my actual role. And this is more or less where the importance of having a creative director or having a boss who understands you as a person comes in. Because Alex, I think he understood where I wanted to go in life, and not necessarily in the context of Ogilvy. So he knew how to suggest certain things to me. He knew when to speak to me, when to speak for me, and when to leave me to fight certain battles myself. Because I think that's also something important with being like a white ally. Because sometimes white people think they have to save the Black people, and sometimes it's just a mere case of advising them on the certain way to go based on their knowledge of how things typically work in the business. And what I liked about that was he gave me the freedom to tell him that, no, I need you to go and speak to XYZ person for me. Or it's just a conversation of, this is what I'm going through right now. I don't know how to navigate through it. Is there any way that you can suggest that I handle the situation?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was one key element of the support that I had at that agency.
Yeah, I'm just even going to pause you there because there's so many things involved in what you just said. The first thing that I picked up on is this like double labor that you have to do when you are someone of color, like at an organization. You have to do the kind of, if it's Women's Month, you've got to do that, you've got to figure it out. If it's like Black History Month, okay, you've got to come up with the ideas and things like that. And it's not like that's like paid work that you get to do, you know, and it definitely has financial consequences for the company when you appear more diverse and everything, but you're not getting compensated for it. Not that you need to, but I'm just saying it's not, this is free work.
Something that's
this is free work. But then it's also quite taxing cognitively as well, because it's something that's important to you. It's something that you know is important. You don't want to turn your back on your community and people that identify with you. At the same time, the work that you are getting paid to do, you now no longer have time for that. And I think that's just a super interesting thing that I realize not everybody has to kind of like bear.
through.
Exactly. And I think that was super interesting. I think also kind of picked up on having a good like boss is just super.
Context is weight.
I know. Yeah, because you said that like he was very good at kind of like letting you kind of like, you know, have your own agency whilst you were going through things, but then also knowing when to kind of speak up as well. And I think that's just amazing because having somebody that also, I think the comment that you made, which is so really in some ways bizarre, but like really, really powerful, that he knew the context of like just like where you wanted to go in life in general. Most people, because they have no incentive to do so because they're not paid to do so, do not care about where you want to go in life. It's more so how can you serve this organization right now, because that's what they're getting paid to do. So to even kind of like step outside of that and say, actually, Natalie says she wants to be here, here and here, and perhaps we can line her up with these things. And perhaps at some point we may no longer serve her in that way. I think is like very, very empowering, because then you're no longer like a commodity. You're more like this is a personal investment. Exactly. Which I thought is that's an amazing thing to have. So you were saying that that's one of the experiences that you were having at the agency that kind of played its part in, you know, you eventually.
I guess that was one side of it, like in terms of me just feeling like not even just it being about Ogilvy in itself, but being about because I came in here in a specific context as an intern, naturally to progress I have to do it outside of here, even just to test if what I've learned actually works. Because if you're learning about something and you're also applying it in the same space, sometimes you don't really know where your impact is actually being made. But then if you're duplicating that in another context, then it works. Then you know, okay, like, you know, clearly it's adding up to something. So yeah, it was more or less just me also wanting to test the skills that I've learned somewhere else in a different sized agency as well. And then the other layer was like in building newcomer as well, because Ogilvy's such an established business, I didn't want to get to a space where there's like clashes with one building and stuff like that. So I wanted to give myself the opportunity to move to another context where they know about what I'm building from the first day. So it's not like a surprise. If things end up progressing with newcomer as well. Yeah, that's amazing. So there's always a lot to unpack. There is always a lot to unpack when you speak. But in the very first answer you gave, you were saying that you came out of uni and then you were kind of figuring out like, okay, like where do you want to work? And then you end up working at this place that unintentionally perhaps, or maybe even intentionally, you have been like gearing yourself towards anyway, because you've been writing about him, you've been studying him. And so what interests me is like two things basically. What one to talk about first? Okay. Let's talk about this one first. So you're at Ogilvy and you end up working, I believe, on like campaigns of like Coca-Cola, Sprite, for example, and like kind of talk to us about like that journey as well. Yeah. So actually, before I worked at Ogilvy UK, I was working at Ogilvy Ghana. I can't even say I was working there. I was doing an internship there for a month. And in terms of how that came about, back in 2016, I believe, I wanted to do that internship at Ogilvy Ghana, and my dad knew someone who could help me get that internship. So I was like, okay, could you set this up for me?
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, if you come to Ghana this summer, I'm canceling your Christmas ticket. And I was going through a lot.
Yeah.
Like the whole point of going home, like socially makes more sense to go in December as opposed
Yeah.
to like summer. So I was just like this first year babe going through a crisis.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where we went back and forth on this for 2 months. And then when he decided that, okay, you can come, but I'm definitely canceling your ticket, I was like, okay, I'm going to start freelancing to pay for my own Christmas ticket. And that's when I founded. So this was all our fight. Like, I don't need your buddy. So that's when I started freelancing and I started Latch. And the whole point of Latch as well was to kind of condense everything I did under one name. Because in secondary school, like people knew me as the photographer, the people who was like designing people's posters for their parties and stuff. But they were taking all of these things and I realized that people were finding it difficult to describe what I was or what I did. So I was like, okay, just know Natalie's Latch, and the Latch, she does whatever the hell she wants.
Yeah.
And it worked out that way in uni. So that's when I started freelancing, and thankfully he never really cancelled the ticket, but it still gave me the incentive that I needed to start my own business. And I actually didn't do the internship in 2016. I did it in 2018, like a couple of months after I graduated from uni. And literally in the last week of that internship at Ogilvy Ghana, that's when I applied for the pipe at Ogilvy UK.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of thing where I was always looking for opportunities at Ogilvy UK anyway. So I just always knew that internship was going to crop up at some point.
Yeah.
And then thankfully, that's what I ended up doing, because every other thing I applied for, I got rejected. It just so happened that the one thing I wanted was what I got.
That's just so interesting, because when you say that, like the whole like kind of idea behind Latch was to almost kind of help people understand what you do, like immediately I'm kind of taken back to when you said like when you were 12 that like you picked advertising because like you just thought that it's something that people would understand.
Yeah.
And so like in my head there's this still kind of like thing happening, at least in this point in your life, where you're still trying to like help people understand what it is that you do. Which is really interesting. That's interesting.
That's very, wow, I've never thought about it that way, but you're right. Like, I think I've always known what I've wanted to do. I just enter a particular context to make sure that other people understand what I want to do, because especially with like other fields like law and medicine or whatever, it's very easy to describe what you do, but I always feel validated in my role until I have to fill a form and it's like, what's your occupation? Like, what does a creative mean? It sounds like games, you get what I mean? And I guess it's just trying to like validate what I'm doing to encourage other people to do it as well. Because like even going back to what I was saying before, not everyone has a parent who will encourage you to go into the creative industry and stuff. So I'm just always trying to put myself in spaces where other people can also understand what they can do in the industry and actually do it, as opposed to just think of it as a theory and stuff. Yeah,
I found that really interesting, because I just know it's like very difficult to constantly have to translate who you are to other people, and then eventually you get to a point where you're like, actually the work will talk for itself. Eventually you will understand, like as in people now will understand who you are based off of like what you do. And I just think it's quite I don't know, it's probably functional to behave like this, but to kind of have to condense ourselves into this kind of thing that people understand is just quite strange, because as human beings, as in you're a whole human being, as in like you have several interests. Like it's never made sense to me to kind of have to draw a thread between, you know, like what people did before and what they do now, and like it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. I think it's one of the things you kind of come to learn once you like quit things again and again. You kind of just wake up and say, actually, even if no one gets why I'm moving to this thing, I'm gonna do it anyway. And I'm gonna try it out. You know what I mean? So I think that's super interesting. I think that one of the things that like just as I was just kind of like thinking about you and the kind of things that you've done as well is you studied a particular degree at university. Talk us through that experience.
Okay, so sometimes I say I did my degree for decoration, but I think it was still very important for me to do that because, I studied international media and communication, and I think it was very useful for two things. The environment of uni is what helped me really understand what skills I wanted to get into, because with ACS, with me running for creative director for the African Caribbean Society, my campaign was almost doing other people's campaigns for them.
Yeah.
Because when I started taking my own pictures, designing my posters and stuff, obviously other people who were also running needed those as well. So that really gave me the opportunity to test what I could do without having the pressure of like actual clients and stuff like that. So once I started doing that, I had like a mini portfolio to actually start doing freelancing in uni. And yeah, I think if I hadn't gone to uni, I wouldn't have had those like soft opportunities to like try out things and stuff. And then the other side of it is like, I think we've already lightly touched on this, but people assume what media is, or people assume what the media and communication world looks like without actually knowing what goes into it. Yeah. Because it feels, the things that feel the most obvious or the things that feel the most natural are actually the hardest things to execute. And that's more or less what media is. In terms of people watching a movie, they laugh, they cry, they go through all of these emotions, but to manufacture content that actually evokes those emotions is one of the hardest things to reproduce. And that's more or less what my course at uni did. It helped me learn all the isms of the world, like feminism, racism, etc., and putting them into the context of the kind of narratives that we should be creating. So that was the relevance of my degree. But on the other side of it, in terms of teaching me like the basics of photography or graphic design and stuff, nothing in that category. But I think everyone who does design or production of any sort should also have that context of the narrative, because I just think sometimes people just create anything anyhow and hope something sticks. And that's kind of how I feel about TikTok, which is so ironic because my entire job at Billion Dollar Boy is creating content for TikTok or Instagram, etc. But I think with the fast-paced environment that it requires, naturally people tend to think less sometimes of the content that they're creating. And sometimes people create content merely for the objective of going viral or something like that. And sometimes people do anything to go viral. And at the end of the day, like, of course, you might get the numbers and everything, but what did you actually add to the actual makeup of society and stuff? So yeah, once again, I think the relevance of my degree helped me really zone in on certain things, and that actually informed some of the initiatives I took at Ogilvy as well, and obviously one I'm taking with Newcomer as well. Yeah,
I find that so interesting for several reasons. So one, I'd like to say that like the stereotype of creatives is that they tend to explore other educational paths. Like they may not even necessarily look at uni as something that is necessary. Whereas like you're saying you've gone and you've actually learned concepts and nuances that have actually kind of informed your work. And so I find that interesting first and foremost. The second thing is that, so first thing is that there's room for somebody like you and like your interests like 100%. In university. I think that's like mind blowing for several reasons, just because as I say, I think people like to think that creatives are this thing that cannot really exist in academic spaces, and they're not, as in some might say, oh yeah, they don't want to do essays or anything like that, or these kind of strange stereotypes.
It's always an added, it's always an added layer that's important, because in terms of everything else that I do, that was like self-taught, but I don't think I would be able to have some of the opportunities I've had if I didn't have the added layer of theory. And it's also worth acknowledging that obviously not everyone has the access to that extra layer of knowledge. But wherever you have the opportunity to pick uni, I would always say yes for that very reason. I don't think you can ever really waste knowledge, because you can use it 2 years after you went to uni or 20 years after you went to uni, but knowledge is always applicable in some sense along the lines. It just depends on the context.
And then you even kind of talk about how even outside of the course, just being at university gave you opportunities to build your portfolio. And these are things outside of your course as well, which I thought like was remarkable. And then the other thing is that like you actually studied something relevant to what like you wanted to do.
Yeah.
That I find mind blowing, because usually the people that come on this show, myself included, the story is that like you study something again because you're kind of pursuing this kind of acceptable form of yourself, basically. Yeah. And then you don't, I can't even use the word realize, because deep down, as you said, you know precisely what it is you want to do, basically. Well, you may not always know, but at least you might be able to
have a fair idea of
the ballpark,
what it looks like,
and you know it's not what you're doing now, basically. And then you end up kind of like either trying to pursue other things outside to compensate for the fact that what you're doing now isn't what you want to do, or like me, just go all out and just like quit the degree. So for me, that was like accounting and finance, which is just hilarious every time I say it to myself, because it's just so not me. Like, and so like for you actually studied something that really complements what you went to do, which again is just kind of indicative of the fact that you knew from a very kind of early age what it is that you wanted to do, which I find very interesting, just because like I know some people find out later in life, they don't know, you know, so they can't make these types of decisions, basically. But then there are other people who I feel deep down have always known.
I think everyone
I want to say that, but I just don't want to make a sweeping statement. But I want to say that deep down that everybody knows.
Because I've had friends who had like tiny interests, like, and I've always been very like observant, because I find that the quieter you are, the more you're able to take in your surroundings. And there were interests that they had in primary school or like lower secondary school that they just used to do in passing. But like you would mentally take note of like, maybe this person likes to cook, or this person really likes sports, but they don't really take it seriously. And then now that's the entire business. Like I saw that. You know? And it's like people, there's always a tell. I think people always have a tell, but there's like a combination of different things that in the end determine what people actually go into. For some people it might be their parents, for some people it might be financial constraints of like studying what it is that they want to do, for some people it might be the fear of failure, for some people it might be a sense of like security in terms of the stage of their lives that they're in. Like with newcomer right now, if I was in my 30s with like, I don't know, 2 kids, I don't think I would have had the flexibility to like experiment and explore and like throw like a ton of money at if I had like dependence and a partner and stuff. And I agree. I think some people have, I'd say, I don't know whether the word is burden, but baggage. Some people have the baggage of like perhaps like older adults, for example, when they're very young, you know, like, and you can't pick, you know, the kind of life lottery that you do get. But I just think it's important to kind of just acknowledge the fact that you kind of knew from an early age what field you wanted to go into, and you just kind of pursued that. You didn't bother kind of thinking, oh, let's see what law is saying. You know what I mean? Like, let's see. There was actually a stage where my dad was like, oh, do you want to do media law? Just like, nah. Then
media law? Oh, yeah, that's a whole different
He was trying to like have the best of both worlds kind of thing. But my dad and I are so similar that we clash a lot. Like we if I'm set on something, like, your opinion, that's great. Thanks so much for that. But I'm gonna do what I want to do, and that's exactly what happened with that. So I don't even remember him really pushing with that, because he knew it would just be a lost cause. And even with the kind of conversations we had when I was slightly younger, it was almost reverse psychology in a sense, because he and my mom kind of said, "You're Naki, like my sister. You guys can do whatever you want. We'll support you." It almost made us more certain from the beginning, because we knew we had that cushion regardless. So it's like, we might as well just zone in and experiment within this space, and then if we fall, at least we know like our parents, if anyone, would be there to catch us, kind of thing. And like I was saying earlier, that's something that I feel is an extension of what my purpose is, extending that cushion to other people in the creative industry, especially for like people both like here and by people I mean like Black people both here and on the continent. Although like our struggles might be different because the context of being here is different, it all amounts to the same thing of not being able to be as creative as one would be. Like here, you have the barriers of like racism and everything that comes with it. But even just being a minority in the first place, like the kind of content that you create automatically almost isn't mainstream from the start. You have to do more work to get your work, you have to do more work to push your work out there, right? Whereas if you're living in Ghana like myself or anywhere else in the African continent, you have, as soon as you create content, it's black content.
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? And it's the norm. But then you have issues of, you're more likely to have issues of sexism or classism on the continent, and just the issues of local Africans just not being regarded as people who can create great content compared to the rest of the world, including the diaspora, right? And it's also considering the nuances of what those experiences mean and what the privileges of both sides of being Black or African is. And I think that's something that we're starting to acknowledge, but I feel we still don't acknowledge enough, because a lot of people here tend to fall into the whole diaspora savior complex when they try and do stuff with things back home. Like, surely they haven't tried this. This works in London, so it should work in Accra. But there's a reason why London is called London, Accra is called Accra. Like, they're two different places, and fair enough, some solutions might apply to both spaces, but it's just the assumption that those back home don't know what they're doing that introduces so much tension that shouldn't be there, and in the end it ends up taking us further back than we should be going. I've gone on a tangent. But
No, I love this, and let's go down this rabbit hole, because I love this, because I've always kind of been of the belief that, I think in Afrobeats, and I know this kind of sounds even further left, but I am going somewhere. In Afrobeats now, I feel like we've now kind of like gone past that inflection point where we, like, this genre can now no longer be stopped. This is now popular music now. Not pop per se, but it's now popular music, this type of music now. And it's only going to get more and more popular, right? And I'm kind of wondering, at least what I suspect will happen now, is that now that music is kind of taking its space on the world stage, other forms of art as well may use this door, you know, to kind of like for it to follow. Because I do think other forms of art, like perhaps, let's say, you know, food or kind of like film, they are a bit further behind naturally, and I don't know if I can say naturally. I don't know whether I can say naturally, but I think I want to believe that more money has been put into music
100%.
Than any of those other
100%. And music is more accessible as well. You don't need to know how to speak French to appreciate a French song. You don't need to know how to speak Tree to appreciate a Tree song. And music is very accessible in that sense. And music has also been positioned as the gateway to Africa culturally as well for that reason. So I wouldn't be surprised if more investments are being made into that as well. And then like film, then tourism, like etc.
Exactly.
Like, that's like an entire build attached to that. And I know we said we weren't going to talk about Santi, but I feel like Santi is a very good example of this, because with his album, right, it's obviously like an amazing project in itself, even with the whole additional layers of the worlds that he's created and stuff. That's something that not every artist or album can do. But as much as I am acknowledging that, I know there are also some people who are also giving Santi heat because they feel he's had a certain kind of upbringing that is affording him the freedom to do this. Which is fair. But then on the other side of that, like from his point of view, and I guess other people within that space, it's like assuming I've had certain privileges doesn't negate the quality of my work. And I think in raising some of those points, it comes across as you're trying to be something you're not. But because I'm not making Afrobeats, it doesn't mean I'm not making Nigerian music. Because if you actually like listen to the further like sonic elements in the album, there's obvious African influences in there. And it's easier to just discard that and just be like, he's trying to appease to the West or whatever. And I think it's a hole that a lot of creatives fall into, because naturally to be able to go into this industry, I said naturally, actually not naturally, sometimes, it might be because your parents might be able to afford to take that risk, because people tend to think that the creative industry isn't lucrative or sustainable. So in order to get your kids to try that, you need to be confident in the fact that they might fail, and you have to be able to
And they'll be
financially
okay.
support that fail. Yeah. And you can't, it's not the same across other industries. So I do see how people would assume certain things of other people's creative expressions based on that. But at the same time, you can't like put a blanket over everyone and assume that it's the same.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I agree, and I think like, because I was in the thick of that discussion, you know, of like Santi's album and, you know, what people were saying and certain radio stations and whatnot. And so what I thought was super interesting is that when people, because this is actually very, very relevant to what we're discussing now, like African art and the perception and everything like that. When people talk about privileged African artists, I do see the alternative music scene get a lot of like acknowledgement. Yeah. But our lovely beloved Davido, who had his concert here just moments ago, we don't speak about that person. And that's somebody with he's from an extremely wealthy background.
Yeah.
Like, this 30 BG thing is not a joke. It's not a joke. You get what I'm saying?
It's not afraid to there.
So
the money's
there. So do you get what I mean? And we see people like, and that's why I think Davido is very important culturally. Yeah. Because like now we're able to see, basically, it's so funny how I don't know how we've gotten here.
That's actually super relevant because he lived in the States as well. So he does actually have that dual lifestyle. But I think because when he's acknowledging his African side, he does it in a way that people find it easier to relate
in a familiar way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people don't really give him a lot of heat for that.
Yeah.
But for all the people in the alternative music scene, because they might not necessarily express their African side in a way that people would typically expect them to, people tend to reject what they either don't understand or they just feel
they don't think it's African.
Yeah,
because it doesn't sound familiar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a weird one.
And I think it's super relevant because we're talking about creatives and we're talking about perceptions, and we were literally just speaking about how you kind of had to translate yourself to other people.
Yeah.
And we've already seen what happens when people do that in the music world, basically. We've seen that, you know, with certain artists. And so hopefully, like, those of us that are in now, like, different forms of art, whether it's film, whether it's food, whatever it is, we can kind of look at those kind of lessons and say, actually,
I might as well just be myself.
To do that. Yeah, I don't have to do that, you know, which is super interesting because that's exactly what you were saying at Ogilvy when you were like, okay, I don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You know, like, as in, I don't have to do this. I can go and do my own thing, basically. And so it's just interesting that we're seeing it on like an industry scale, but also like personally, even in your life, you're kind of realizing that actually I don't have to be this type of person. 100%. And even at work, when we were talking about, you know, the double labor type of thing, you kind of realize actually you don't have to be this like person that has to shoulder all of the diversity burden. You don't have to be that kind of black person. So I think it's something that creatives just kind of have to deal with over and over again. So that I find super, super interesting. So you quit this job now, and then you start Newcomer. Yeah. Talk to us about Newcomer.
Cool. So Newcomer, once again, I think is also another thing that I've always known I would end up doing. So Nigel, my co-founder, and I, you know Nigel.
Yeah. Shout out Nigel.
So we went to the same high school, SOS in Ghana, and actually to explain why that high school was important. So the whole thing about SOS is you have people from literally all over the continent coming to SOS. We're in Ghana, by the way. So you have people from Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, like literally all over the continent in this boarding school for 4 years. So we're not just learning about the Pan-African theory, we're living this theory in a bubble. And like our motto was knowledge in the service of Africa. And it's something we just used to like sing during school and stuff. But you imbibe that ideology in a lot of ways. And I think within that time period, Nigel had done a course at wow, I can't speak.
No worries. Let's start again.
Nigel had done a course at the London School of Photography, and I think I had done one the following year, and he joined for IB. So actually, context, it's for 4 years, but for IG is the international equivalent of GCSEs, and then obviously IB is IB. So Nigel joined in IB. And I remember I'd already known Nigel, but when he was coming, I was like, oh, there's another guy who's also really into photography, etc. So you gotta steal my shine.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah.
But then he comes and like it naturally like dissolves and stuff because it wasn't a competition. We actually rather took to each other because we could relate to a lot of similar things. And because we had both done the course at the London School of Photography, we realized that there's not, if I wanted to do that same course in Accra, like in Ghana, like I can't, because there aren't a lot of spaces or organizations that focus on stuff like that for creatives on a wide scale. So we already started talking about like trying to set up similar workshops for people in Ghana and across the continent and stuff like that. And just fixing the structures or building the structures that are required to help creatives be more creative, but then also connect opportunities to whatever they've decided to get into. Yeah. So yeah, those were conversations that started in high school. So this was like 2012, etc. And then 2017, when Nigel and I are both in uni, same uni, obviously, you know.
Yeah, we all went to the same. We all went to the same university.
Yeah, so we started working on a project in 2017 called the Cool Kids Project. And the reason we started this project for two reasons. One, we had a natural detachment from the creative scene back home in Ghana because we had moved here to the UK. And the other side of it was we realized that for people just coming up in the industry, they can be super amazing, super talented at what they're doing. But then people don't really respect what they're doing until they've gotten some sort of international recognition and stuff like that. And it's like, but they've been great from the start.
Yeah.
So why don't you acknowledge them from the start? So we for the first edition of that project, we featured La Mem Gang, Benoit Hamilton Rain, Denzel, and then this guy called Bishville. He's a chef now. And the whole point of that was to mark them up on like popular magazine covers like The Fader, Forbes, etc., to show that these people have just started in their industries. We've marked them up on these covers. Do they look out of place on these covers? I don't think so. So the whole point of that creative direction was to show that these people can actually assume these spaces and you should be acknowledging them from now. And it was super interesting that we did that because for some of the fake mock-ups that we did, some of them actually realized those features in 2 or 3 years. So it was really validating for them, but also validating for us that we were able to see that in them. And we did a second edition of that. That was more of like a documentary approach. So instead of just mocking them up on magazine covers, we interviewed them to talk through their processes, their challenges, and everything that sat on top of that.
This was on YouTube, right?
Yeah. And through doing that, everyone's problems were the same, and we related to those problems as well. And we wanted to build on top of that and not just interview people in Ghana, but then people across the continent. And we realized that how do we find the Darker Vibes equivalent in South Africa? How do we find the Benoit equivalent in Kenya? And obviously, Instagram can only do so much. Twitter can only do so much in connecting these people. You have to be in these spaces to know.
On the ground.
Yeah, to know who is coming up and who is doing what. So we're like, okay, we're struggling. So instead of focusing on finding people for this third edition, we decided to build a platform that addressed the problem that we had, which was finding African creatives, but then also giving them the spaces to develop their crafts and then obviously find jobs that sat on top of that. So that was more or less our personal rationale for starting Newcomer. But from the wider scale on top of that, if you look at how many young people are in Africa, in the next 10 years, we're going to be the most. Yeah. We're going to be the youngest population, like, on Earth. And most of these people are creative, and most people generally across the globe are hiring from the creative industry the most right now, especially if you look at how things have changed over the course of the pandemic, remote working, brands, startups especially, having to push even further with branding and creativity to ensure that they're standing out from everyone else. Like, creativity is just a commodity now that just wasn't the case
It's
before.
a necessity now. I mean, we're seeing brands that sell shoes go into content creation. I mean, I think
100%.
that's kind of like all we need to say. Do you know what I mean? Shout out to you guys as well. But like, that's just the state of affairs now. Like we live online. Yeah. That's where we live. Do you get what I mean? 100%. And so we have to speak to these people that are online. But
so of course that's happening on a global scale. But once again, like, when people say, oh, we're working on this global campaign for a brand, it's usually UK, US, some parts of Asia, some parts of Europe, maybe South Africa, maybe Nigeria, and then they call it a day. And we're usually lucky if we get Nigeria or South Africa in these global campaigns.
Yeah.
And our whole point is, like, why don't you actually work on actual global campaigns? But then we also acknowledge that sometimes finding the talent, like we also went through, was difficult. Or sometimes you find the talent, and because certain things are being worked to a specific context, the expectations might not necessarily be aligned. And obviously with the typical parental constraints and stuff like that, you have people who might be transitioning from other industries or might not have had any formal background in the creative industry, or even people even knowing that they can be in the creative industry in the first place. Like, a lot of people don't know that they can draw, and that's your job. Your job is to draw. Like, people think that sounds crazy, but that's been someone's job for 30 years and they're making like big bank out of that. So it's about gathering all of these insights and creating an ecosystem for African creatives to thrive. But yeah, in and of itself, it's currently existing as a social media platform, but our aims for Newcomer are so much bigger than the site itself. The site is a channel, but it's not the product, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm super interested in Newcomer for several reasons, but like, I think the biggest reason is that as a Nigerian, I'm acutely aware that when we do get like kind of like acknowledgement on the continent, it's us.
Yeah.
That's where
Big
that's where they
brothers
come
and
to. Yeah,
sisters.
exactly. Yeah. That's where they come to. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
And then now, you know, and they also go to Ghana before anybody starts firing me in the comments. You know what I mean? It's most of the time it's West Africa.
Yeah.
Maybe South Africa. Not even Southern Africa. No.
Yeah.
South Africa,
Yeah.
the country. And so I think for me, it's like when I kind of came across it and, you know, spoke to you about it in the earlier days, it's just kind of this opportunity to actually highlight like creators from like other parts of the continent is super, super important. Not even because of like, oh, let's have like other, just for the sake of it or anything.
Yeah.
But new stories. There are going to be different types of stories. You know what I
Even
mean?
already we can see that the African stories are becoming like samey already. And it's really interesting that you say that, because if you think about, once again, throwing in the diaspora as well, if you think about the media hierarchy of like influence and stuff, is usually African Americans, people across the diaspora, people on the continent, West Africa, and then you start
Lagos.
And Lagos.
Not even like, you know what I mean? There are other states in Nigeria, but it's Lagos that they go to.
Exactly. And
you know
then
what I mean?
you go even further to like, not like you literally just said, not Southern Africa, like South Africa, and then Kenya, and then like everyone else. And even the fact that I'm saying everyone else is problematic.
And everyone else we're talking about are like, as in
50 other countries.
You're talking about loads of other countries.
50 other
Morocco's
countries.
in there. Do you get what I mean?
It's crazy. And like, I think it's only now that people are realizing that like, oh, there's more to the African story than the stories of like 4 countries. And if you look at some of the reasons why, it's even like linguistic barriers. Linguistic, is that the right word to use?
Yeah, as in people are just speaking different languages,
that's
and not just even the language, but even
exactly,
the
even
demeanor.
how it's spoken, like the tone and stuff like that. Because naturally, like the UK, US, they're Anglophone, like they're English speaking. So the countries that are English speaking are more likely to thrive at these like media hubs, and I think that's more or less what has taken over the narrative in a lot of ways. And I think once people start to actively acknowledge those kind of barriers and make content more accessible for everyone else, I think things would be a bit easier. But I think so many things need to happen on a cultural and societal level for even what we're building at Newcomer to be as impactful as it should be. Because if you look at things like literacy rates, if you look at even electricity, cost of data, like stuff like that will all affect someone's use of Newcomer. Yeah. And until some of those things are addressed, what we're building will still only be accessible to a certain pocket of people. So that's why from the very beginning, we've been saying the site is a channel, but it's not the full product. Yeah. A lot of offline stuff need to happen as well. Yeah. To like tap into all of these other spaces that also deserve to have the freedom to be creative.
Yeah. And I really like that, because there are barriers, structural barriers, like as to why this isn't, this isn't the case just because, like, there are,
100%.
there are structural barriers as to why, we're not hearing certain stories. But again, my hope is that as like music as an art form is now, taking, that center stage, like that other art forms now use opportunity. I'm already seeing it. I know where it comes to film, for example, I can really only speak for Nollywood and certain shows, so like series in like South Africa and like Kenya specifically, they are getting like more noticeable. 100%. Of course, we've seen like Blood and Water, for example. Exactly. Like doing absolute numbers now. We're seeing them get like international recognition and everything. I think we are still at that stage where, and things can happen concurrently, but as you say, you kind of spoke about the importance of international recognition in the past and the problems that leads to as well. And so even with Newcomer, like, I'm really hoping that, like there is some sort of recognition element that can come from that as well, in a sense of like, that what we don't want to happen is, again, like music, we pass that inflection point and internationally that we're regarded and all this kind of good stuff, but then we still kind of seek that, kind of external, like validation like from them when we don't need to. And so I just feel like platforms like Newcomer are important like for that journey as well. And so that's just like super, super, super interesting to me. Yeah, that's just super, super interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing that became apparent to me as well is you did actually study this business entrepreneurship course at Harvard as well. And now you're actually, running your own company with your co-founder as well. I'm seeing like just a lot of dots basically between, things you did in your earlier days and the things that you're doing now. But I'd love for you, particularly like as somebody that sees themselves as a multidisciplinary creative, to speak on the impact that like perhaps like studying business had as well. Because I think one of the biggest tropes right now and probably forever has always been creatives getting absolutely fleeced for like their work. Like the other day, I won't name the artist, but I think it's public kind of knowledge now. There is an artist actually from Ghana that his deal allegedly is $86 a month. That's how much his music deal is. Yeah, and that's a real deal. It's real. That's a real deal, and he's a phenomenal artist that's now getting international recognition. But talk to us about the importance. What kind of deal is that? Yeah, I know. It sounds like a phone contract. You know what I mean? Yeah. But talk to us about the importance of doing that work.
Okay, so I'll go off a tiny tangent to answer this question.
Please tangent us. Tangent.
So in terms of how I ended up in that Harvard course, it's actually off the back of another Flipboard link from my dad. And he was like, I've seen this. Are you interested? I'm like, are you going to help me pay for it? He's like, sure. So once again, like, and I say all of these things intentionally, just so people are aware of how it can be or how it should be. I don't want to use the word should, because obviously everyone and what they want to do. But for me, having that cushion, once again, having that freedom, having that financial support from my parents to explore and build on my skill sets is something that has always added up to, ironically, me fighting to be more independent for myself and what I'm building. And I think that the relevance of that course as well was contextualizing what I did creatively in a business context. And that's also another reason why my dad wanted me to do it, because like you said, everyone assumes that being creative is just doing a lot of things and hoping something sticks. But then to introduce structure and to introduce a formality,
like a method to the madness almost.
100%. Yeah, that was his rationale behind me wanting to do that. And actually for my mom as well, in terms of how she influenced my career choice, it was also through seeing her doing things for herself as well. So for context, she's she runs a gym, right? So because she was doing that, she had the flexibility to also be a mom. And growing up, having my mom be a business owner but feel like someone who was always home was something that I always wanted. And going into the creative industry, I felt like I would have that flexibility as well. Ironically, I work stupid hours. But like I also know eventually when I get to a stage where like I have kids, etc., like I would also want to have that that flexibility. And emotional intelligence is something that is like super important, but a lot of people don't realize it's as important as it is. That and having people skills. And that's something I get from my mom as well. Actually, my dad as well, actually. And but especially for her being able to read people and understand people and having certain emotional cues has really influenced my decision to go on certain paths and to have certain levels of empathy for creatives and wanting to build certain structures for other creatives. Because I easily could have been that person where I have all of these like connections from my parents, or my parents are helping me do XYZ, or not even just my parents, like people in general are helping me do XYZ things. Or I've gotten certain opportunities at Ogilvy where I'm keeping this for myself. I'm going to go through the door and shut it behind me kind of thing. I easily could have been that kind of person. But it's through having those like additional layers of the importance of seeing yourself and others and seeing how they could reflect what you're already building for yourself, and just helping them get to a stage where they have everything that they need to do so is something that I feel I got from my mom, and it's something that I think more people should have. However, I also don't think it's everyone's responsibility to build everyone up, because you should still put yourself first. It's like you know, on the plane when they're going through the
and they say
checks.
you should put your own oxygen mask on first.
Exactly. I believe in that 100%, because if you don't really know what you're doing, you aren't really building yourself, how can you then translate that to other people or transfer whatever you've gotten to other people? So yeah, I think it's just finding the right balance, but I also don't think everyone has to do that per se.
Yeah.
It's a personal choice.
Yeah, I think what I love about what you're saying is that you acknowledge the connections that you've had in your life, and the result of that is you build this platform for people to have connections. Like, as in, like, I think that's just like amazing, because as you say, there are several other things that you could have done with your time. As you say, you could have just said, you know what, like, I've got these, let's keep them for myself. You could have had this kind of scarcity mindset, like, oh, you know, this might run out, for example, if I kind of, you know, give this opportunity to other people. But then you build a whole platform where these creatives can get, you know, the connections that they need. And I think it's important to, for me, I'm really, I get really excited actually when I speak to people who've had like different upbringings, like as in like probably contrary to the stereotype, particularly when it comes to Black people, because everybody wants to have this like, you know, prosperous life where they can kind of like afford their children the types of things that you're talking about. But for some reason, funny enough, like when we're talking about David and Santi, when you're presented with those people face to face, you have something to say about the legitimacy of their work, of their, you know,
suffering.
Of their person.
We don't have to glorify suffering. And I think that's probably what leads to the tensions that we have with Santi and everyone else who's kind of like him. And sometimes it's a bit frustrating, but then I also check myself for that frustration, because it's even like in secondary school and stuff, maybe your particular year group had to, I don't know, write 5 tests a week or something. And then for the next year group, they decide, okay, we acknowledge that was a bit much. You guys should write just 2. And then obviously the year above starts treating the year below them a certain kind of way, because it's like, you guys didn't go through what we went through to get here kind of thing. And people tend to be resentful towards people who have had it easier. But I can also understand the people who get frustrated, because it's like, it's almost like I went through that for nothing.
Yeah.
Like, or why am I in this space? Or why did I have to fight this hard or go through all of these barriers to get what someone has gotten in like 2 steps? So I see that side as well. But it doesn't have to be that way at the same time. So it's just a balance of both.
Yeah. And again, I just don't even think I don't think it's productive, because if you want that for your children and then you meet somebody's child who's in that position, surely, I mean, if anything, you should be asking them all sorts of questions, because you need to prepare yourself
because
for what it is.
At least you know it's possible.
Exactly. And so I find it inspiring. And I think as long as you're not doing the whole, we've all got the same 24 hours thing, then I think it should be perfectly fine. You know what I mean? I guess just to kind of like on a final note, like what kind of advice would you give to, I guess, 2 kinds of people? One, to the kind of person that comes from the kind of background that you're talking about. Perhaps they didn't go through, you know, the absolute trenches and with like the basic necessities in life. Of course, don't get me wrong. People still go through things that are inconvenient. Please. I'm not, regardless of where it is they come from, people still go through things that are inconvenient. People still go through things that they'd rather not, you know what I mean? But there obviously is a difference between that and like abject poverty, for example.
100%.
And so what would you kind of say to the people that come from perhaps a slightly more privileged background, who do have the connections, who may either in kind of rebellion to that life, try and kind of cosplay as somebody who you know doesn't come from that background. And we
Yeah.
see that sometimes, which is
Yeah.
just kind of weird.
Like, what are you doing?
You're not from there. You know what I mean? You don't speak like that.
Yeah.
Let's kind of tone it down a bit. What kind of advice would you give to that kind of person?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but then also, you know, just what advice would you give to the people that, you know, you're helping ultimately?
Yeah.
And you're assisting ultimately in like kind of navigating these creative spaces?
What I'd say to the first group of people is acknowledge said privilege. I think privilege isn't a bad thing. Everyone wants privilege. Everyone wants a leg up, right? But I think the problem comes when people don't acknowledge it or they pretend like they don't have it. And I find that in acknowledging privilege, it helps you understand, one, how you got to certain spaces, how to take advantage of the spaces you're in, and also, once again, how to duplicate that privilege for other people who don't necessarily have the same access. And on that last point, like I said before, it's not something that everyone has to do, but obviously you don't lose by giving. I personally don't believe like you lose by giving. And there was one point you said about things not running out. It's like the opportunities
scarcity
will
mindset.
not run out.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
as much as we like to think, like a very quick example is like there can only be one black female rapper kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like and there can be more than one, I promise.
Yeah.
You know, and I find that every time like I extend something to someone, like it eventually comes back. It always comes back. So acknowledging your privilege is one thing I would say. And then for everyone else is having the mindset to know when to take a risk and when to just stay put. Because once again, like considering all the other factors that might affect where you are in life, you might take a selfish decision and then all those other factors end up crumbling down because you have decided to take things for yourself. Of course, for some people it works out, but then for some other people, especially if you don't have the privilege to fall back on certain things, like quick example is maybe a story of someone leaving their law degree to pursue something creative. If it's against the will of your parents, if whatever creative venture you've gone into doesn't fare well, because you've already gone against your parents, they might not be as willing to help. And although on the parents' part, that shouldn't be something that they should do, it's up to you to figure out what you would do in the reality of that situation. Always have a plan. You don't always have to have something like set in stone. Like for me, like I think throughout this conversation, I've always known what I've wanted to do roughly, but in terms of how to get there, like I'm open to the journey. And I think that's a very important thing, being open to the journey, but having a fair sense of like what your final destination is. Yeah. But I think for some people, sometimes tunnel vision is great, but with tunnel vision, you lose sight of all the other opportunities or explorations or ideas that you might have experienced in the absence of being open to that. So
yeah, definitely. That's amazing. And I think like even on your point just about, you know, like if you are in the example that you gave, studying law and then you kind of leave it to do this creative thing. The thing I love about like just like creativity is that like there are several things you can do to test what you are talking about. You do not need to just make the jump immediately, you know. And I wouldn't even advise anybody. I wouldn't advise anybody to quit something if they want to do X, and they've never ever even done anything remotely, you know, X related. Do you get what I mean? It's like, how do you even know? Do you get what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying sometimes not to be mistaken with like, sometimes whatever it is you're doing now is so bad that you just know you don't want to do this. Fair enough.
You just want to take time to explore something. That's fine.
Leave. Fair enough. But I'm saying if it's the case that you want to leave to do something else and you haven't even like explored it or done anything actionable with it, and I think not the reason, I was going to say excuse, but the reason people always give is that like, oh, I need to leave to do X. No, not necessarily. Like, as in, like, I think there are like forms of it that you can execute like on that may not be as grand as you kind of like, you know, envision. But let's see how those go, you know, and if those go like well, or perhaps like, you know, you enjoy it, then at least you have more kind of like, you're more confident in making the decision as opposed to...
I'm so glad you said that. I'm so sorry for cutting you off. Especially now in the creative industry, you don't... 10 let's take 2004. If I wanted to become a filmmaker in 2004, that shit is not cheap.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
but now I can experiment on my phone. I can have certain like a certain level of experimentation with like storytelling and stuff like that, with even with Adobe Creative Suite.
Yeah.
That wasn't accessible until like 2013.
Yeah.
Right? Well, accessible to everyone until like 2013. And it's the fluidity that comes with that gives people the freedom to explore before they jump into it fully. Even apps on your phone can help you like edit and stuff like that, or photography, or whatever it is that you want to do. And also just being open to like other possibilities. Like this year I decided I want to go to PR and I've never done PR before, but through having to do it for newcomer and stuff, I've realized that, okay, it's something I can see myself eventually doing. So that has been my like additional layer for 2022. I'm using one of my friends as a guinea pig. If it works out, fine. If it doesn't, fine, because I have other things that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So once again, always having a plan, always having a fallback. So yeah, it's good you said that.
Amazing. Well, where can we find you? Where can we find Newcomer? You know, where should we be looking?
Cool. So for me, Insta, Twitter, etc. At Natalie, NATALIIE_N. And then for Newcomer, new.comma on Instagram, new_CMMA on Twitter, and then newcomer.com.
Amazing. And I think I'll do the honors. Thanks very much. Oh, that was really good. That was really, really good.